So I say, Hazen, let's call to order at 6:34. And I was talking, but nobody was hearing me talk because I was on mute. So I was telling Marilyn about my tacos I made. I was thinking about her while I was cooking for Taco Tuesday.
No, don't talk about food. I'm starving. Please don't.
I know, but I thought of you while I was cooking. So guess what, guys? It's week 4. You made it. Congratulations. Yay.
You did it.
Seriously, we are so thrilled that we were able to go through this process. And so tonight, our agenda is around really reflecting on what these 21 days have been for you all as individuals. We'll speak some about what it's meant for us as a group, and certainly ideas about how we want this to just be the starting point for us in terms of these conversations and thinking ahead with some future opportunities to partner, to collaborate, to share your experience, and to help bring this to others. And so that's going to be the focus of what we will, the meat of our conversation tonight. And so yesterday I sent out the email and kind of gave you some ticklers on, what we wanted you to think about in terms of sharing. And so the items that were listed were simply sharing one of the things that you've learned, throughout this process, whether it's about yourself, whether it was something in your reading or something that you watched that you just didn't know that maybe has stuck out to you. And, what did you discover about yourself? So when we talk about, especially as it relates to implicit bias and some of the things that we only know what we've been taught. And so looking at doing some self-reflection of where you are in this journey and what that might look like now going forward. So with that, Marilyn, let me do a point of clarification as it relates to the agenda. With the video that I sent out to you in the email, are you good with that?
Did I see the video? I don't think I saw it. I don't know.
Okay. It's kind of what I picked out to kind of close us out.
I said, that's why I said I threw up the ball, because I really just wanted it to be shared. I kind of just want to listen. I threw up the ball and said, whoever catches it. So absolutely, whatever it is, I look forward to it.
Okay, and it is 19 minutes, but I think it's a great way to culminate what this experience hopefully has meant to you all. And again, as we think about what this narrative is going forward, but we will do that after we get through the items with having everybody have the opportunity to share these other pieces. So with that, I would like to turn the floor over to whoever might want to share first. So something that you've learned in this process and something you discovered about yourself that maybe you didn't know. Any takers?
I have an idea or a suggestion because I'm not bashful. In my upbringing or career as a chef, I worked with people from all around the world in the big hotels, whether they were Chinese, Japanese, Austrian, French, German, from India, from the Middle East in general, from South America. And what I tried to do during those times and throughout my life was learn how to say good morning, good afternoon, good evening, please, thank you, in their languages. And as I was reflecting towards this meeting, I was walking the Greenway and a couple Indian people walked by me twice, and I thought, I think they speak Hindi, but I don't know how to say hi in Hindi, although I interact with Indians. And so one of my takeaways is, could we have a cheat sheet of the most used languages in this area, those types of phrases, so that we can extend the feeling of welcoming? And that is somewhat reinforced by one of the videos that I saw. It was a TED Talks, We the People. And they talked about clans. And it was an Indian man who talked about how every Indian tribe is different, et cetera. And I thought that one of the ways we need to maybe make other people feel welcome is to learn something in their language.
Okay, duly noted. I've made note of that.
I think that's very thoughtful and considered. I mean, one of my hopes and dreams is to be multilingual, right? So having a way to greet people, certainly simple things. I think that's a wonderful suggestion, Jeff. That's wonderful.
Thank you, Marilyn.
I can share something if you like. I
Absolutely.
have been working from home. I think a lot of people know that I started my own business now when I was working, and a few people that have ever driven with me, Jeff Miller and some others, may know that I have very eclectic taste in music, and some of my favorite music is 30s and 40s jazz. And I found with the internet, I was able to find a station in England that specializes in jazz from the 30s and 40s. So I had that playing in the background. And Natisha, I know you said we could, kind of go our own way. You had a lot of suggestions, and I largely followed them. But today I kind of went off on my own, and I thought of a song that was recorded in 1939 by Billie Holiday. And I remember hearing Billie Holiday when I was a kid, and I always thought she sounded like an elderly woman singing. She has a very unique, odd intonation, but beloved by jazz aficionados, I suppose. But she recorded a song in 1939 that was based on a poem from a gentleman named Abel Meeropol, who was born to Russian Jewish immigrant parents. And the name of the song is Strange Fruit, which I think many of you have heard. If you haven't, it's just excruciatingly poignant and tragic. And Billy sings about the fruit of human bodies being lynched in trees and compares the bodies to fruit. So I listened to that, and I thought, and I watched a video of her singing it live, and she sang it with such emotion. It was just tears at your soul. You could tell she was really affected by it. And I did a little further research, and a lot of scholars think that song was part of the birth of the civil rights movement as early as 1939 to really bring attention to the plight of African Americans in the U.S. So I was kind of reflecting on how far we've come. You don't hear too often, hopefully never, of folks being lynched these days. And then to finish up, I read a essay by Julian Bond that was written in 2008, and its title was Civil Rights Now and Then. And he was saying, kind of doing the same sort of reflection. Again, this was written in 2008, and he was saying, we've come so far, but we still have so much farther to go. And the emphasis of his essay was that by 2050, whites will no longer be the majority. There's Asians, Hispanics, and blacks will be the majority in the United States, and whites will be a minority. And so that we all need to work together. So also, when I spoke at some of the Black Lives Matter events that we had earlier this year, I often said that when I was growing up, when I was taught in school, I thought the civil rights stuff happened back in the 60s and we were all good. I thought that in the 70s. I think the biggest thing I've learned is that there's still a ways to go, certainly. And probably for myself personally, the biggest thing I learned is you don't have to, a lot of this stuff focused on, I'm not a racist. I'm not a member of the KKK. I'm not a member of a white supremacist group. I don't say racist things, but realizing that, especially as a white male, how much of an advantage I have had over maybe some other people, and how unfair the system is. And really, as Julian Bond, who in 2008, I believe I'm not sure when he passed away, maybe a few years ago, but he at the time was the president of the NAACP. I think I agree with his essay, even though it was 12 years ago, that we've come so far, but there's more work to be done. And I think meeting in groups like this and having honest, open discussions is really important and one of the very best ways we can do that. And some of the best things that I watched in this series were when maybe a black person and a white person sat down and spoke to one another. I even watched Chuck Wilson watched your series with Leighton Harris. So
Leighton Harris.
Leighton Harris, I'm sorry, I mispronounced his name, but yes, so I guess that's it. I've kind of meandered a little bit there, but I think overall we've come a long way, but we're not done yet. More work to do.
I kind of would like to piggyback off that. My big takeaway was very similar, is that, I think I mentioned this a few meetings ago, is that, in school we're taught, the Civil War happened, so slavery was over, and then civil rights happened and everything was great and racism was ended. And, throughout my life, I've started to realize that, we're not there yet. We have a really long way to go. I after John Lewis passed away, I, with my girlfriend and her family, took a trip down to Alabama, and we went to Selma and got to march across the Edmund Pettus Bridge. And we were speaking with a man whose father was there on that day, and one of the people who were beaten by the state troopers. And he said the things that he sees in Alabama and in other places throughout the country is that things aren't much different than that day in 1965. He said it's really heart-wrenching. He said, my father was brutally beaten, and then to watch George Floyd murdered, and the video being on Twitter, he said it killed him inside, that there was so much more to be done that even he didn't realize, who's someone who's super active in civil rights. And so I think a few takeaways is that, knowledge is power. How do we continue to educate all generations that there's a long way to go? And I think when people have the knowledge of what actually is going on, what's systemically wrong with the way we treat people of color, or, anyone who may not look like you, if we have knowledge of that, we can start to fix that. And so I think within this, I've learned a lot. I mean, watched as many videos and read as much as I can, and learning has really created a new perspective. So if we can continue to have meetings like this and continue to have discussions like this in the open, where we're able to share our thoughts and feelings, I think we can start working to that equitable future that we all want.
May I say for a minute, Ken, missed you last week. Glad you dropped in and mentioned, but I just wrote down, just listening to you talk, you've been on a bit of an odyssey, on this entire journey. I mean, I mentioned how I still think it's completely epic and monumental, and we'll look back on it. The fact that we started on election night, but you were at Thurgood Marshall's tomb, right? And I don't know, probably did something mystical when you were away last week as well. And then the Pettus Bridge. And so, I mean, that's just phenomenal. So I just wanted to voice that. It just seems like a wonderful odyssey, and whatever experiences and things you're having. I think that's fantastic.
I made a conscious decision. This year has been rough for some people, and I've had the opportunity, been very blessed to have the opportunity to do some traveling this year. And so I wanted to travel to places where I could learn something. And I think I kind of keys back into it is, if we can see those places and learn more about the folks who've laid the groundwork for the work we still continue to do, I think we can do some really great things.
It's amazing. It's awesome.
I'll go next. One thing that I've learned in this process, and is that time and delay is not a denial. Delay is not a denial. And what I mean by that, 4.5 years ago, when I came to this board and we talked about this racial equality board, this board, and as Hazen was with us, and I think John was Mayor Pro Tem, and Jeff and was on that board, and we talked about it, and we got it started, but it did not take off too well. And I think Hazen would contest this. It started up, and I remember the term that board used to say, tell us what we don't know. And that was a big quote, because we didn't know what we don't know. And it evolved, and then it went dead, and 4.5 years, and now we have this. And not only this, we have the mayor, the town manager, and 5 commissioners. It is mind-boggling. This is what I've learned, that sometimes it takes time, and I'm very impatient when it comes to equality, because I think we as a people have waited. I tell Hazen this, and the reason I'm calling Hazen, because Hazen and I have had some good discussions about equality, racism, and stuff. And at the same time, the more we talk, the more we are getting better at this. And so to see us tonight, and I say us because the town of Matthews, and I'm a person that whatever part or whatever I'm a part of, group or organization, I want to be the best. I want to represent myself along with those with me out front as being the best town commissioner. And I'm saying this all. I am so delighted with the mayor and my commissioners. Y'all just don't know. I don't believe any of the other 5 towns surrounding Charlotte. Now, Charlotte is well racial mixed in equality, but the other towns are not. I think Davidson might have a black commissioner. Am I right, Hazen? Davidson or
Cornelius does.
Cornelius. And so for us, Matthews, to evolve and where we are today and talking about racism and racial equality. And so my takeaway is that it takes time talking and being together. Pastor Chuck, our relationship is all part of this as well too, because from the day one we met, we never, and I think I say this, I know Chuck well enough. I don't think neither one of us ever thought about color, but we were brothers. And I mean, truly, we break bread together. We've been to each other's house. We've been out to dinner together, been to worship together, you name it, we did it. And he know my kids know him. It's that type of thing. But I always share with in the group that we are better today than we were yesterday. What I learned about myself in this takeaway is that I have to be patient for change to take place. And I've learned that in the last 6 months, to be patient and wait and let the process work out. And I believe that within my heart that this process is working for the good, and it's going to come out that Matthews and this board and this group that you are part of is going to be out front, and it's going to set the stage for other towns around us to take us as a sounding board and learn from us. Thank you.
Thank you. That certainly is the hope, right? To be a model, right? No, to be a model, as you said, for those surrounding towns and for Charlotte.
It is.
I'm sure they can help. They can learn from this as well. Everyone certainly can from the experiences and the conversations, for sure. The community. What else? What's next?
Now we're way past being scared, you guys. I'll go because mine's brief, but important. I think through this process for me, when I think about what I learned is how much I still don't know. And so I think we've all talked about as we got into the readings or a video, then you go into the next thing and you go down that rabbit hole. And so it was just intriguing in relearning so much of what was mistaught or that was never taught at all. Looking at things from different perspectives, saying, how I was raised, the environment I was raised in, and looking at things with a different lens. And so I've noticed myself over the last several weeks doing a lot more of that. Certainly who's in the room, who's in certain positions, who are the decision makers, and just being very aware, even though I was before, keenly aware, but really just paying attention to what this system is that we live in and how we navigate that and what that really means. And so for me, certainly this is just a starting point, and I've shared I'm going to do this challenge with my board of directors and my team as well, because I think there's such benefit in this. And, looking at we focus so much on the differences versus the similarities. And so the more we can peel back these layers and get back to a commonality, which is humanity, the better we'll be served. And so I have found it to be very enlightening. I've also found it to be very scary. Thinking about my children, I have a son, 24, a daughter who's 13, what I'm doing and how I'm helping pave the way for them. And, we've certainly heard tonight, we've come a long way, but we've got a lot further to go. And so I go back to our first night and with the election, with Kamala saying, I may be the first, but I won't be the last. We still have a lot of firsts that are in front of us. And so looking to do my part to help pave the way for whatever those firsts might be, and certainly not allowing them to be the last. And so that's kind of where I'm. And I'm very, very genuinely thankful for everyone on this call's participation. I know that when I came on board the CDC, I think it was the second meeting, Hazen, that our chair decided he was going to leave. And they're like, well, you should be the chair. And I'm like, okay. And so certainly the iterations we've been through and trying to get to where we are and to see this come to fruition, it was a huge, we count that as a huge win for us as a committee and for the town. And so I truly am thankful for everyone on here, for your candor, for your willingness to have these tough discussions and to share. I've learned a lot about everyone around the screen here, and certainly look forward to what future conversations will be. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
Everyone, my hero of heroes is a man by the name of Jackie Robinson. When I was a kid, I could not get enough of Jackie Robinson. And oddly enough, they show the movie 42, and if you've never seen that, they show it all the time at different places. And just the other night, it wasn't one of the videos that we have us looking at, Marilyn Letitia, but it was the movie 42 that just grabbed my attention. And it's the story of Jackie Robinson breaking the Major League Baseball color barrier with the Brooklyn Dodgers in 1947. And you may remember, if you've ever seen it, according to the movie, Robinson asked Branch Rickey, who's the general manager of the Brooklyn Dodgers, he asked him several times why Rickey is so keen upon breaking the color barrier, but he never gets a straight answer. And then one day, Rickey finally tells him, and he does it kind of reluctantly, of the time decades earlier when he was coaching the Ohio Wesleyan University baseball team, and their black star is a first baseman by the name of Charles Tommy Thomas, and how Thomas had suffered all kinds of racial onslaughts, which moved Rickey deeply and motivated him to bring justice to the game. All that being said, after I watched the movie, I came back to my desk and I wrote down two things, just takeaways. And the first one was, I must know my own history. And I must own my own history. I think it was Archbishop Tutu that once said, to know one's history is to know who you really are. And so I need to own my history, and I need to know all of the ups and downs around race and things like that for me. And then number two, for me, a very important thing is I really think I have been clueless about the Black experience. And my conversations and relationships with people of color have convinced me that most white Americans, myself included, we don't know the Black experience or the experience of so many people of color in our culture. And I have had difficulty at understanding the endemic prejudice that Blacks and others have faced for centuries. And those two things are my huge takeaways that I'm committed to keep working on.
I mean, wow, that's the force of a megaton, right? I mean, that's like an atomic bomb level of realization. My goodness, we could just end the call right there. No, I mean, thank you. That's amazing. And 42 is one of my favorite movies, and Jackie Robinson is also a hero of mine as well. But just understanding experience and being open to it, and understand that. I don't even need to reiterate what you said. That was wonderful. Thank you. Yes, I see.
I'd like to dovetail on that, and I guess mine are going to be somewhat quick hitters, but both my parents, I've mentioned already, are from Massachusetts, and my mother felt like the United States was the greatest country by far in the world, super patriot. And, kind of like Chuck said, what I'm learning is the actual history, what my mother had in her mind is a myth, not intentional, but it was still a myth. And so what's I've learned is there's a lot of bad stuff that the United States did to other races. And affirmative action. I re-listened to one of the podcasts, the Seeing White podcast about affirmative action. And I have these friends, the high school and college friends who live down in Louisiana. And I think about the conversations I would have with them. And one, do I just want to destroy the relationship, say, look, I got to move on. But, affirmative action for a lot of white people, they think, oh, that's for Black people to get ahead. And what this podcast talks about is the GI Bill. It talks about all these affirmative action programs that whites have benefited immensely more than Black people. And so part of me, and this is probably not a good thing, is I think about how could I bring up some of these topics with these friends that are 60-year-old white men to have a real dialogue instead of, it's reversed, racism's reversed now. Now I can't get ahead. And in reality, those guys have been getting ahead for generations. We have talked about with the department heads, our department heads are going to go through this. I'm excited about that. We had dinner with our neighbors Saturday outside, and they're African Americans, and so we got good conversation. On the way out, I said to them, because you have these thoughts, you think, oh, I got to say this. I said, look, if I do some type of microaggression to you, please bring it to my attention. And we were just like about walking out the door, just a real side comment. But what I felt like from a body language standpoint is that they really appreciated, because I guess it happens all the damn time, right? And so to open that door, I said, look, you feel free to bring it to my attention. Be gentle. I'd ask that you be gentle, but because I want to learn. So, it's been a good 3 weeks for me.
That's awesome. Sounds like you should have a safe word. I like that. Like, let's have a safe, if you have a friendship or something, like, let's like out or something that like Bobo, something. I think that's really awesome. And to be able to have that kind of a relation, yes. I'm feeling better. I'm feeling better already. That's wonderful, and I think that's very awesome, very intentional of you. I'm sure you read the body language correctly. I'm sure that was an appreciated comment, because I'm sure it was. Yeah. Awesome. What's up next? Anyone? Is that you, Bob? Are you saying go for it, Bob?
Yeah. One of the things I've become increasingly aware of, what I watched, listened to a couple lectures by William Darity from Duke University, an economist there, how connected discrimination is to economic injustice and inequity, and then what to do about that, and where do you start? So that's kind of my question. But I'm aware that moving toward a living wage for every full-time worker in the country would be a major economic disruption for our society. I'm be curious about how we might address that sort of thing.
Economic equity for all? How we would address that? That's
fairness, anyway. Economic fairness. It's just not right for somebody to work a 40-hour week or more and not make enough to live on. That's just ridiculous.
Yeah.
And what it means is, one of the things it means is, what I buy is going to cost more. That's not the American way. We try to get the most we can for the least amount. But somewhere along the line, if you got a hot bargain, somebody didn't get enough. The farmer or a bunch of people maybe didn't make enough to live on, and it's not right. Rudolf Steiner, 100 years ago, said one of the things we need to do is make sure we pay enough. Make sure we pay enough. And what he means is for everybody along the production distribution line to receive a living wage. And what would that look like? So that's what I'm wrestling with.
I want you to think about what that distribution of wealth is. I was just reading something before we got on that Elon Musk is now number 2. He's knocked Bill Gates out of the number 2 billionaire spot, and he's worth, I think it was 169 billion now. 100 billion of which he made just this year alone. Just let that sink in. He made $100 billion this year. This year during a pandemic, this year where we've been hit with things we've never seen in our lifetime, $100 billion. So when we look at how we're structured and where the money is made, there's just an unequal distribution of wealth. And so, right, in the richest country in the world, there's no reason people that work shouldn't have access to housing, education, healthcare, period. We have the resources. It's how we choose to allocate. When we spend $8,000 a year per pupil to educate our students and $45,000 a year to house a prisoner, there's something wrong with that. Let's put it on the front end and invest up front. So we have the resources. We have to have a willingness to actually redistribute, and it's monetized. And if there's not money in it, because at the end of the day, when you think of all the wrongs in our country, what does it truly come back to? It's a money game. And so until that shifts, it's going to continue to be a money game. Sorry, that was my 2 cents. I do the housing thing for a living, so housing will always be unaffordable with where we are until we do have a living wage. It's just housing. People won't be able to buy homes, period, at the rate we're going. Home ownership will no longer be part of that American dream realization.
And home ownership has been one of the ways many of us have built wealth.
Absolutely.
And then how you pass it, there's just so many things intersect, how you pass the wealth along and who the tax breaks favor. It's all connected somehow.
Yeah.
Yes, Michael. Mr. Bland.
I've been thinking about it pretty hard, and I've had a lot more questions, but most of my questions, I guess, have been at looking at, I think, relationships that I never really thought about before that I've had with other people of color and whatnot. And maybe it was because I was so confident and so privileged or arrogant or whatever you want to say, that I just assumed that my way of thinking about it was the way it always had to be, as opposed to maybe other people weren't looking at it or looking at me the same way that I was thinking they were. So, like I said, there's been a lot of questions in my mind, and I've tried to think about it and, think of maybe better ways to address people or deal with relationships. I don't know. It's been a very, in a sense, troubling, but in a sense, maybe that was give me a clarity a little bit on some things. So, it's been good in that way. But like I said, it's raised a lot of questions in my mind at the same time, as opposed to necessarily giving answers necessarily. So that's sort of where it was for me anyway.
Sounds like where I surmise Ken's odyssey as being an external one. It sounds like yours is more internal, because that sounds definitely like the kind of a journey, an internal kind of an odyssey that one would expect to have an experience dealing with these type of issues, and like looking at the people, looking at yourself, actually the model we followed, self, and then the community of people around you, and then looking out in the world. So you're actually like following that model, and I'd say doing it in a way that's very authentic. And thank you for sharing that.
I'd like to go if that's okay. For me, I had mentioned this a few weeks ago, but I grew up in a predominantly white community. My family was mostly mid to low socioeconomic stand, and everybody in our community was kind of the same way. And I heard a lot of the same things growing up, like, well, I got a job and I pulled myself up by my bootstraps. They can too. And, as far as we're talking about racism and talking about the community, and they just couldn't understand why in the community that there were so many issues, because they did it and everybody should be able to do it. And these were a lot of the conversations that we had growing up and a lot of the things that I heard. And so for a long time growing up, I didn't really understand. I was like, well, if my parents did it, then somebody else can do it too. And what I learned, especially in college, was that my family and the people around me, they had the opportunity to do it, and their skin color wasn't something that got in the way. And then I started realizing all of these challenges that people of color were facing. And it was kind of eye-opening for me to be like, wait a minute. Oh, I get it. Like, they have so many barriers to getting to the same thing that we do, that we have, the things that we've taken for granted. And I think, and it took a while, it took a lot of listening to people and really getting their point of view. And so, over the years, I've kind of, developed this understanding that the issue is so deep seated. And I think the biggest challenge for me is understanding how to move forward. Just like in the uncomfortable conversations with a Black man, like, how do I be an ally? And that was one of the things that really stuck out, because sometimes as a white female, I know I have a certain amount of privilege, but how do I use that privilege to advocate for those who may not have that privilege? How do I be an ally to them? And another thing that for me was just understanding too, that while I, in my personal journey, I feel like over the years have come pretty far, going through all the resources you're provided, there are so many things that I did not know, and so many resources I didn't know it was out there. And also understanding that some of the things that I think I'm doing to advocate might not be beneficial. And again, the things that, are important to me that I feel like everybody should have because they're so great for me, it's not appropriate for everyone. It goes back to just thinking about, the equity versus equality. We don't all need the same thing, and that's okay. It doesn't make me any less of a person to help somebody else out or to maybe I say give away power, but that's not really what I mean, but empowering others maybe would be a better way to say it. It doesn't compromise me. And I think that there's this overwhelming feeling that to pull somebody else up, that means I have to go down. Like, I have to devalue myself. And that's simply not true. And trying to explain that to other people, like just because somebody else needs help doesn't mean that you're any better or worse. Just because you listen and you start to understand, it's okay to change your mind and it's okay to grow. And I think there's a lot of stigma around that. So the biggest thing for me is just still understanding how much more there is out there, because it's just incredible amount of things that even myself, who studied history and, teach high schoolers, how much I have left to learn. And also how, me as a white female can really help the cause. I was really nervous when I was being, interviewed for the Cultural Diversity Committee. And I thought, oh my gosh, me as a white girl, I don't know if I have anything worthwhile to contribute. How can just little me, like, how can I make a difference? And what I'm finding is there's so much beauty and diversity of voices. And I think also that, I may not know what, my role is right off the bat, but just understanding that there's a place for everyone. And even if you feel uncomfortable or unsure, that you can also be part of the solution. So definitely felt a lot more empowered going through this journey with everyone.
What you said made me think of the quote or the idiom, rising tide lifts all boats. So, if you go up, we all go up. So I think that was a fantastic analogy. People are going to be shy. All right, I'll jump in if no one's jumping in right now. This topic of racial equity is different for me. I started off my college journey as an environmental engineering major at Humboldt State University in Humboldt, California, in the Redwood Country. Changed to an English major and ended up, before I left, creating a special major in African studies with the emphasis in literature and social sciences, and still having a minor in English. So many of the things that people are kind of discovering and coming across the bear, I experienced those things as like a 19-year-old. And with the Rodney King. And so it was like this is like a Renaissance time. And so it's interesting being the mother of a 23-year-old Black man, and seeing having social media in a way that we didn't have before, being a real life grown up and a responsible individual, having people's lives and education and future in my hand. And so it's just been, this has been a really interesting 21 days because I took it seriously and doubled down on some things, but I don't separate myself from this. So it was more like a deep dive, and a deep dive in a time as divided as the world is right now. And the many ways I have to compartmentalize to show up in the world. It's been really, really tough. It's been really, really tough. And I wasn't sure how transparent to be about that. But I do equity work with gifted education for Black children. I mean, it's what I do. And I know I mentioned before we had this conference. And so all of these things have been weighing on me quite a bit. One thing that did come out this week, I don't know, I have my little Ta-Nehisi Coates book, Between the World and Me. It was a national bestseller back in 2015. I don't know if it's on the list of things we were supposed to read. I think there were some quotes by Ta-Nehisi Coates and some excerpts from things. But this was the 2015 book that he wrote. He wrote it to his then 15-year-old son at the time, a letter to his son about what it means to be a Black man in America. It's very moving and historical. He talks about when he was in college at Howard and a murder that happened, a murder by the police. It's a long, drawn-out thing. So from 2015, they transformed it into like a stage production. It was performed on the Apollo with all of these different performers reading excerpts from it. And so just this past week, I think on Friday, HBO and HBO Max, maybe it was Saturday, released the dramatic version. It's the dramatized version of Between the World and Me. And I watched it, and it was heavy, and it was beautiful, and it was powerful. And I would suggest and recommend, if you all have HBO, to watch it. Of course, if you haven't read the book and are not familiar with the book, then I certainly recommend that you do. It's like when I got it in 2015, I bought it for me and my son for Kwanzaa, and we read it during Kwanzaa that year. So to see it come full circle. So like I said, it's been heavy. It's been a lot to prepare for this, and still engage in the world in a certain way and manage things. I appreciate it. But it's been tough. It is going to continue to be tough because things aren't, necessarily changing anytime soon. All of the questions, all of the things you're saying, all the things you're bringing up, that's the world we live in. It's the real situation. And so being an advocate for social justice and for racial justice and for equity, the struggle continues. So I do appreciate this. I appreciate this experience. But yeah, it's been tough. A lot of anxiety, a lot of tears, a lot of journaling, a lot of frustration. It's been tough. It's been tough. So that's my truth.
I was just going to say, Ashley, listening to you kind of talk, and then Marilyn, you saying like rising tides lift all boats. One of the things that I have witnessed in the African-American culture, I went to a predominantly African-American high school, and then I worked for a school that was predominantly African-American. And one of the things that that community does really well is lift up those that want to move forward and who want to go places, like in terms of doing mentorships and, letting someone shadow them, things like that. That community does that really, really well. Sometimes when I find, like when I went into a new community, when I moved up to California 5 years ago, is that I had to go out and I had to like seek people to help me and to help me grow my career and to help mentor me. But that's just something like I just expected that I was going to do that, but it kind of brought it full circle for me. Like when Ashley was speaking, I'm like, oh yeah, that definitely happens. You have, people that in the African-American community, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but this is just what I've experienced and what I've seen, that are willing to help like students, that are willing to help those that are, who are basically needing to be, for lack of better words, lifted up. I think that's such a great thing. And you don't have to, like you said, Ashley, you don't have to devalue yourself. Once I started learning, I wanted to help people myself. I wanted to help, take somebody under my wing and like help them make the connections within the community, help them find, job opportunities or, schooling opportunities, whatever they wanted, whatever they needed. So I, was trying to do that like on my own if I saw somebody kind of struggling and somebody, that needed help. So I'm going to continue doing that. I want to continue helping people. I will say I'm going to give Natisha a big shout out. She's helped me so much. So I don't know if I've mentioned, but we just moved here back in June, moved back to the East Coast closer to family. And so, I'm in the nonprofit space and I've been trying to, kind of find my way. I'm in nonprofit fundraising and looking for a new position. And Natisha's really helped me, like kind of taken me under her wing and introduced me to her contacts. And I think that's important. And I think it's important that, we do it for everyone, like people who want to go places, who want to go forward. We need to identify those folks and we need to help them. Doesn't matter what color their skin is, we just have to do it. So that's definitely important. So that was just what I wanted to say. I'm really, I'm excited to be a part of this. I came into this not really knowing what's going to happen. And I saw all the faces and I'm like, wow, I don't really have that much in common with, and that was just like my first impression. I'm like, I don't know if I have anything in common, but, listening to everybody speak, listening to the stories, like Pastor Whitley, your stories have been amazing. Like I've shared them like 10 times with different folks. Like, I know that now I have something in common with all of you. So, the first one being, passion for, creating some equity, amongst our, the different races. But anyways, thank you guys so much for this experience. This has been really great. And then all you folks I told you last week who put this on, it's been amazing. So thank you. I can't describe it anymore. It's just been so wonderful. So.
Thank you.
Hey, Marilyn, last week, I told Chuck I had a big old afro. He said he didn't believe that. So I went back and got my college yearbook.
Uh-oh.
Now, you see it, this is back in 74. And this is my senior book from North Carolina A&T. It's a fist, the power of the people. That was back in Angela Davis and Chris and I. Chris Daddy was a police officer in Raleigh, and Angela Davis was marching in Raleigh. And so Chris and I got in my car and we drove from Greensboro to Raleigh because we didn't want her dad to know we were marching. He was the deputy sheriff looking over the parade, and so we were trying to dodge him. But I wanted you, Chuck,
the
to
evidence.
see this gorgeous afro. If you can zoom in, let me make sure I can get where I am. You see that afro, Chuck? So I did have
Where were you, Larry? Which one? Were you in the middle?
The one on the end, on the very end.
On the end, okay.
Right there at the end. The good looking, the handsome looking one. So that was my afro back in 1970. But you know, I look back, that's 48 years ago. That's a long time, and we've come a long, long ways in those 48 years. I'm very blessed, but just let you know a little bit about our pride from A&T and what we set out to do. And
Aggie pride. I'm an Aggie mom. My son went to A&T.
All right, and Aggie pride. And you know what that is. But Chuck, I want you to see me with an afro, buddy.
Renee, I think it's you. You're the one that's left.
I guess I've been sitting here waiting, thinking that something would profound would come up. There's a lot to think about and a lot to sit with. And with myself, I wonder where we take this as a board and what systemic changes we can make as a board. One of the things that, and I don't know if I said this another week or not, that hit me hard when I was doing the work was these two guys were talking, and one was a black man and one was a white man, and the black man asked the white man if he could set aside his whiteness as he approached his life, and that is just a really strong, sort of powerful thing. Like, we obviously can't separate ourselves from our skin color, and but when you experience things or when you talk about things as white people, can we put our privilege aside and let that armor down so that we can be better allies? And I think as commissioners, that's our job, is to, lift everybody up by separating ourselves from our whiteness. I'm still working on all these thoughts, and it's still kind of, I'm sitting with it, thinking about it.
Sounds like you and Marilyn are kind of in that same space.
I was going to say, Renee, like 15 minutes, 5 minutes before I had to hit the Zoom call, what you're saying, your facial expression, what you're saying, how you're feeling is exactly how I felt. I was like, how am I going to do this? I'm like journaling, writing notes to myself, like what am I going to say? Because I'm in this, and it's really, really heavy. And I want to be mindful and respectful of everyone and where everyone is and everyone's truth and everyone's everything. But this is tough. It's tough. So I feel you, Renee. From top
just to make one comment, Renee, I was thinking about your paper, the Beacon, and I believe you have a section that is called One Good Thing, correct? Or something uplifting. The news is always so heavy, so she will insert something that's good. But I was thinking, on my comment that we're incrementally getting better. So it's incremental change. And so if all of us, based on our experiences here, can do at least one good thing and make one positive change, then all this has been worth it, and we'll make that incremental change as a community. And hopefully we'll all make more than one thing better in our lifetime. But we start with one. And if each of us can do one thing to make the world more equitable, then this experience will have been a success, I think.
Well said.
So has everybody had the opportunity to share? I'm looking around. I think everybody has. Thank you, Renee, for that. And I see it. I see it on your shoulders right now. And it's a lot to process, and there's a lot to own, and I appreciate that you've taken it to heart and to that level where, as you said, it's sitting with you. You're thinking about what this is, what that looks like going forward, who you are in this, what role you play, especially in not only you as an individual, but in your role as a commissioner and, serving the town and the citizens that live within. So I appreciate both where you and Marilyn are sitting. And I knew, Marilyn, with your email earlier today, you didn't have to say any more than you did, but I could tell you were in that space.
Thank you.
And so I appreciate the deep dive and just where you guys are. So if everyone's okay, I'm pretty sure I can share my screen. I'll go ahead and play this video. And I was looking through all the different resources, and I had shot an email to Marilyn and Chuck, and I knew in my mind what I was looking for to kind of bring this all together. And I had a really hard time. I looked all last night, and I came across something today, and that's what I'm going to share with you. And it's called The Danger of a Single Story. And it's a TED Talk. It's 19 minutes. But as the young woman was talking, I said out loud, because I was saying to my coworker what I was trying to find. I was like, this is the one. This is it. So hopefully you'll be as enlightened as I was. And it really just kind of talks about where we are in this, and then looking ahead and what is that story going to look like. And so let me see if I can't share my screen and play this. Screen. And I want this.
So,
no, except I'm already at the end somehow. I must have been playing. Let me get back to the beginning. All right.
Storyteller. I would like to tell you a few personal stories about what I like to call the danger of the single university campus in Eastern Nigeria. My mother says that I started reading at the age of 2, although I think 4 is probably close to the truth. So I was an early reader, and what I read were British and American children's books. I was also an early writer, and when I began to write at about the age of 7, stories in pencil with crayon illustrations that my poor mother was obligated to read, I wrote exactly the kinds of stories I was reading. All my characters were white and blue-eyed. They played in the snow. They ate apples, and they talked a lot about the weather, how lovely it was that the sun had come out. Now, this despite the fact that I lived in Nigeria. I had never been outside Nigeria. We didn't have snow, we ate mangoes, and we never talked about the weather because there was no need to. My characters also drank a lot of ginger beer because the characters in the British books I read drank ginger beer. Never mind that I had no idea what ginger beer was. And for many years afterwards, I would have a desperate desire to taste ginger beer. But that is another story. What this demonstrates, I think, is how impressionable and vulnerable we are in the face of a story, particularly as children. Because all I had read were books in which characters were foreign, I had become convinced that books, by their very nature, had to have foreigners in them and had to be about things with which I could not personally identify. Now, things changed when I discovered African books. There weren't many of them available, and they weren't quite as easy to find as the foreign books. But because of writers like Chinua Achebe and Kamara Laye, I went through a mental shift in my perception of literature. I realized that people like me, girls with skin the color of chocolate, whose kinky hair could not form ponytails, could also exist in literature. I started to write about things I recognized. Now, I loved those American and British books I read. They stirred my imagination, they opened up new worlds for me. But the unintended consequence was that I did not know that people like me could exist in literature. So what the discovery of African writers did for me was this: it saved me from having a single story of what books are. I come from a conventional middle-class Nigerian family. My father was a professor. My mother was an administrator. And so we had, as was the norm, living domestic help who would often come from nearby rural villages. So the year I turned 8, we got a new houseboy. His name was Fide. The only thing my mother told us about him was that his family was very poor. My mother sent yams and rice and old clothes to his family. And when I didn't finish my dinner, my mother would say, "Finish your food. Don't you know people like Fide's family have nothing?" So I felt enormous pity for Fide's family. Then one Saturday, we went to his village to visit. And his mother showed us a beautifully patterned basket made of dyed raffia that his brother had made. I was startled. It had not occurred to me that anybody in his family could actually make something. All I had heard about them was how poor they were, so that it had become impossible for me to see them as anything else but poor. Their poverty was my single story of them. Years later, I thought about this when I left Nigeria to go to university in the United States. I was 19. My American roommate was shocked by me. She asked where I had learned to speak English so well and was confused when I said that Nigeria happened to have English as its official language. She asked if she could listen to what she called my tribal music and was consequently very disappointed when I produced my tape of Mariah Carey. She assumed that I did not know how to use a stove. What struck me was this: she had felt sorry for me even before she saw me. Her default position toward me as an African was a kind of patronizing, well-meaning pity. My roommate had a single story of Africa, a single story of catastrophe. In this single story, there was no possibility of Africans being similar to her in any way, no possibility of feelings more complex than pity, no possibility of a connection as human equals. I must say that before I went to the US, I didn't consciously identify as African. But in the US, whenever Africa came up, people turned to me, never mind that I knew nothing about places like Namibia. But I did come to embrace this new identity, and in many ways, I think of myself now as African. Although I still get quite irritable when Africa is referred to as a country, the most recent example being my otherwise wonderful flight from Lagos 2 days ago, in which there was an announcement on the Virgin flight about their charity walk in India, Africa, and other countries. So after I had spent some years in the US as an African, I began to understand my roommate's response to me. If I had not grown up in Nigeria, and if all I knew about Africa were from popular images, I too would think that Africa was a place of beautiful landscapes, beautiful animals, and incomprehensible people fighting senseless wars, dying of poverty and AIDS, unable to speak for themselves, and waiting to be saved by a kind white foreigner. I would see Africans in the same way that I, as a child, had seen Fide's family. This single story of Africa ultimately comes, I think, from Western literature. Now here's a quote from the writing of a London merchant called John Locke, who sailed to West Africa in 1561 and kept a fascinating account of his voyage. After referring to the Black Africans as beasts who have no houses, he writes, "They are also people without heads, having their mouths and eyes in their breasts." Now, I've laughed every time I've read this, and one must admire the imagination of John Locke. But what is important about his writing is that it represents the beginning of a tradition of telling African stories in the West, a tradition of sub-Saharan Africa as a place of negatives, of difference, of darkness, of people who, in the words of the wonderful poet Rudyard Kipling, are half devil, half child. And so I began to realize that my American roommate must have, throughout her life, seen and heard different versions of this single story. As had a professor who once told me that my novel was not authentically African. Now, I was quite willing to contend that there were a number of things wrong with the novel, that it had failed in a number of places. But I had not quite imagined that it had failed at achieving something called African authenticity. In fact, I did not know what African authenticity was. The professor told me that my characters were too much like him, an educated and middle-class man. My characters drove cars. They were not starving. Therefore, they were not authentically African. But I must quickly add that I too am just as guilty on the question of the single story. A few years ago, I visited Mexico from the US. The political climate in the US at the time was tense, and there were debates going on about immigration. And as often happens in America, immigration became synonymous with Mexicans. There were endless stories of Mexicans as people who were fleecing the healthcare system, sneaking across the border, being arrested at the border, that sort of thing. I remember walking around on my first day in Guadalajara, watching the people going to work, rolling up tortillas in the marketplace, smoking, laughing. I remember first feeling slight surprise, and then I was overwhelmed with shame. I realized that I had been so immersed in the media coverage of Mexicans that they had become one thing in my mind, the abject immigrant. I had bought into the single story of Mexicans, and I could not have been more ashamed of myself. So that is how to create a single story. Show a people as one thing, as only one thing, over and over again, and that is what they become. It is impossible to talk about the single story without talking about power. There is a word, an Igbo word, that I think about whenever I think about the power structures of the world, and it is Nkali. It's a noun that loosely translates to be greater than another. Like our economic and political worlds, stories too are defined by the principle of Nkali. How they are told, who tells them, when they are told, how many stories are told, are really dependent on power. Power is the ability not just to tell the story of another person, but to make it the definitive story of that person. The Palestinian poet Mourid Barghouti writes that if you want to dispossess a people, the simplest way to do it is to tell their story and to start with secondly. Start the story with the arrows of the Native Americans and not with the arrival of the British, and you have an entirely different story. Start the story with the failure of the African state and not with the colonial creation of the African state, and you have an entirely different story. I recently spoke at a university where a student told me that it was such a shame that Nigerian men were physical abusers like the father character in my novel. I told him that I had just read a novel called American Psycho, and that it was such a shame that young Americans were serial murderers. Now, obviously, I said this in a fit of mild irritation, but it would never have occurred to me to think that just because I had read a novel in which a character was a serial killer, that he was somehow representative of all Americans. And now this is not because I'm a better person than that student, but because of America's cultural and economic power, I had many stories of America. I had read Thailand, Updike, and Steinbeck, and Gateskill. I did not have a single story of America. When I learned some years ago that writers were expected to have had really unhappy childhoods to be successful, I began to think about how I could invent horrible things my parents had done to me. But the truth is that I had a very happy childhood, full of laughter and love, in a very close-knit family. But I also had grandfathers who died in refugee camps. My cousin, Polly, died because he could not get adequate health care. One of my closest friends, Ukuloma, died in a plane crash because our fire trucks did not have water. I grew up under repressive military governments that devalued education so that sometimes my parents were not paid their salaries. And so as a child, I saw jam disappear from the breakfast table. Then margarine disappeared. Then bread became too expensive. Then milk became rationed. And most of all, a kind of normalized political fear invaded our lives. All of these stories make me who I am. But to insist on only these negative stories is to flatten my experience and to overlook the many other stories that formed me. The single story creates stereotypes. And the problem with stereotypes is not that they are untrue, but that they are incomplete. They make one story become the only story. Of course, Africa is a continent full of catastrophes, the immense ones such as the horrific rapes in Congo and depressing ones such as the fact that 5,000 people apply for one job vacancy in Nigeria. But there are other stories that are not about catastrophe. And it's very important, it is just as important to talk about them. I've always felt that it is impossible to engage properly with a place or a person without engaging with all of the stories of that place and that person. The consequence of the single story is this: it robs people of dignity. It makes our recognition of our equal humanity difficult. It emphasizes how we are different rather than how we are similar. So what if before my Mexican trip, I had followed the immigration debate from both sides, the US and the Mexican? What if my mother had told us that Fide's family was poor and hardworking? What if we had an African television network that broadcast diverse African stories all over the world? What the Nigerian writer Chinua Achebe calls a balance of stories. What if my roommate knew about my Nigerian publisher, Mukhtar Bakare, a remarkable man who left his job in a bank to follow his dream and start a publishing house? Now, the conventional wisdom was that Nigerians don't read literature. He disagreed. He felt that people who could read would read if you made literature affordable and available to them. Shortly after he published my first novel, I went to a TV station in Lagos to do an interview. And a woman who worked there as a messenger came up to me and said, "I really liked your novel. I didn't like the ending. Now you must write a sequel, and this is what will happen." And she went on to tell me what to write in the sequel. Now, I was not only charmed, I was very moved. Here was a woman, part of the ordinary masses of Nigerians who are not supposed to be readers. She had not only read the book, but she had taken ownership of it and felt justified in telling me what to write in the sequel. Now, what if my roommate knew about my friend, Fumi Yonda, a fearless woman who hosts a TV show in Lagos and is determined to tell the stories that we prefer to forget? What if my roommate knew about the heart procedure that was performed in the Lagos hospital last week? What if my roommate knew about contemporary Nigerian music, talented people singing in English and Pidgin and Igbo and Yoruba and Ijo, mixing influences from Jay-Z to Fela to Bob Marley to their grandfathers? What if my roommate knew about the female lawyer who recently went to court in Nigeria to challenge a ridiculous law that required women to get their husband's consent before renewing their passports? What if my roommate knew about Nollywood, full of innovative people making films despite great technical odds? Films so popular that they really are the best example of Nigerians consuming what they produce. What if my roommate knew about my wonderfully ambitious hair braider who has just started her own business selling hair extensions? Or about the millions of other Nigerians who start businesses and sometimes fail, but continue to nurse ambition? Every time I am home, I'm confronted with the usual sources of irritation for most Nigerians: our failed infrastructure, our failed government, but also by the incredible resilience of people who thrive despite the government rather than because of it. I teach writing workshops in Lagos every summer, and it is amazing to me how many people apply, how many people are eager to write, to tell stories. My Nigerian publisher and I have just started a non-profit called Farafina Trust, and we have big dreams of building libraries and refurbishing libraries that already exist and providing books for state schools that don't have anything in their libraries, and also organizing lots and lots of workshops on reading and writing for all the people who are eager to tell our many stories. Stories matter. Many stories matter. Stories have been used to dispossess and to malign, but stories can also be used to empower and to humanize. Stories can break the dignity of a people, but stories can also repair that broken dignity. The American writer Alice Walker wrote this about her southern relatives who had moved to the north, and she introduced them to a book about the southern life that they had left behind. They sat around reading the book themselves, listening to me read the book, and a kind of paradise was regained. I would like to end with this thought, that when we reject the single story, when we realize that there is never a single story about any place, we regain a kind of paradise. Thank you.
So, hopefully you read through the theme there. And the reason that that spoke to me was when we think about, as we've talked within our conversations and our sessions about stereotypes and about what we think we know or what we don't know, this really just spoke to me in making sure we don't get caught up in that single story narrative. And I think I've heard around the room throughout this process, you know, going in and exploring those things and learning a different side. But the thing she said that stuck out to me was that the issue of a single story creates stereotypes. The problem with stereotypes is not that they are untrue, not just that they are untrue, but they are incomplete. They make one story become the only story. It robs people of dignity. It makes our recognition of our equal humanity difficult. I think that that's powerful. And it emphasizes how we are different rather than how we are similar. So that's what really stuck out to me. And so when I think about storytelling is a tool for teaching. It's a way to pass on important life lessons and a basic human drive. Stories give us meaning, teach us empathy, and open our eyes to new worlds. Think about your stories. Think about those you've heard. The single story offers an incomplete picture, whereas multiple narratives can open minds and inspire. So my question I leave you with tonight is, what will your story be? Marilyn, I'm dropping the mic on that one. It's all you.
That's fantastic. I don't think anything else needs to be. Does anyone want to share how they felt about the video and what they saw? I thought that was something I was familiar with, but I'd never seen it before. So that was my first time watching it.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Great.
All right.
You picked the best quotes. If I was going to say anything, you picked the best quotes. The things that spoke to you. So I don't need to piggyback on what you said.
Well, anything anybody else would like to share? We've made it through, and we will follow up. We'll follow up with some additional resources. And as we said, we want to continue a dialogue. And so certainly as friends now, you know, in this group, but then in our role as the Cultural Diversity Committee and your role as commissioners and mayor and town manager of Matthews, you know, how we partner and work together to continue this conversation, not only for this group, but for others. And so we will reach out. I want you guys to think about, too, others that you would like to share this experience with, because our goal is to bring this to the residents of the town. But also, we would love if you have people that you think would enjoy participating in this. We would love for you to make those recommendations to us, and we can set up that specifically for that group. So certainly give that some thought, and we hope you continue to have more dialogue with folks, and that, you know, if there's things that are triggered now. So as you're starting to look, I did share with the group, one of the things I wanted to say to you guys was I was at a luncheon, and the woman that was the speaker, the way that she ended her talk was with the simple statement of, now that you've seen, how will you live? And so now there's things that we've learned, and there's still more to learn. but now there's intentionality behind that. And so I give you that charge as we leave today, to go forth and be the change. And, that's not cliche, because each one, John, I think it was you earlier that said, if something good comes out of this, if we can each do something, that it's that spark that ignites that flame. So we need everybody on board to do that.
I would just like to say that I've really enjoyed this, and I think I've learned a lot from it, and I really appreciate, Natisha, your leadership, and Marilyn, your sage advice and pulling us, getting us to think about different things. And the other thing I want to say is I would love to go out with this group to lunch or dinner sometime, probably in June. But let's plan that when the world is safe again. I think it'd be really great if we could all get together in person and maybe, hopefully, we'll have more interactions with emails before then. But share some of the things that we've seen and done or experiences we've had since completing this course. I think that'd be great.
That would be great. Hazen, you heard that. Put that in the minutes.
I'm very hopeful that by May or June that the world will be a lot more normal with the vaccines and things.
You didn't name a year, though, Mayor. You didn't say which year.
Also, I would like the addresses and email of everyone just to reach out from there and there, because we've been doing this a month together.
Mm-hmm.
We've been spending Tuesday night together, and I don't know, I'm an old country boy. When y'all make this is our dinner time, so it's almost bread together. And I would like to have I think I know all the commissioners, but I don't know all of y'all's telephone number or addresses where we can reach out from time to time again.
Okay. Yeah, we can put together a roster for you.
And you can get ours too. Hazen, you can put our addresses, can't you? Not just the town address, but you can have my church address and house address. But I'd just like to reach out. And I open this, if you're in the neighborhood and you see my white Silverado truck, stop in and holler at me. Might not let you in, but I'll come outside and we'll talk with a mask on.
You got it. And, guys, too, as you start to, I know, Renee, there's a lot of reflection going on. If you have questions or if there's something else you'd like to see or, reach out to us. And that's what we're working through, what this is going to feel like as we move forward. And so this was the first time for us as well, with the exception of Pastor Chuck, who has done this in a different capacity. So we were going with this journey right alongside you guys. And so, we, even for ourselves in this, don't know what those next steps might look like and feel like. So certainly any comments, questions, feel free to reach out, and we're happy to work together on how we shape this, what it looks like moving forward.
Sounds good.
Thank you.
Thank you, David.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
It's been fantastic.
Hazen, you want to close us out?
It's been a great learning experience. That's for sure.
All right. Well, if there's no other comments, if I could get a motion
to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn. Is that what you said, Jeff?
Yeah. I'm used to this.
Okay.
All right. Can I get a second?
But can we get Pastor Chuck to close this group out in prayer?
That would be fine with me.
Good idea.
Thanks, oh God, for great friends that we're building and things that we're learning. All that's before us. It's really challenging, but we're prayerful that we might be up to the task. Guide and direct. And for life and love, for family, for a community that I've never been prouder, we give you thanks. Amen. Go in peace, everybody.
Happy Thanksgiving, everybody. Y'all stay safe.
Thanks.
Everybody.
Adios.
Wow. 7:58, Hazen. Thank you, guys.